The richest man on earth could buy anything except one ordinary human touch. Every sunrise looked identical from the glass walls of Nathan Brooks's estate. Golden light spilled across perfectly trimmed gardens, reflected from a mile-long artificial lake, and disappeared into polished marble floors that had never known a footprint except his own. The mansion stood on nearly 3,000 acres of private land somewhere beyond the Colorado mountains, protected by advanced security systems, autonomous service robots, and a silence so complete it often felt heavier than the stone beneath his feet. Newspapers called it paradise. Nathan called it quarantine. At 34 years old, he had built one of the world's largest technology companies, accumulated more wealth than most countries could imagine, and transformed entire industries with inventions that connected billions of people. Ironically, he could not stand within 6 feet of another human being without his own body turning against him. Doctors had given the condition dozens of names over the years: rare immune dysfunction, extreme environmental hypersensitivity, complex neurological response syndrome. Every hospital seemed eager to invent another diagnosis because none of them truly understood it. The result never changed. Human proximity triggered overwhelming physical distress within minutes. Even brief meetings left Nathan exhausted for hours. After years of failed treatments, he had accepted a life designed around distance. Every employee communicated through holographic displays. Every board meeting happened inside sealed conference rooms separated by transparent barriers. Groceries arrived through automated delivery systems. Medical examinations relied on robotic equipment. Even birthdays had become quiet calendar notifications appearing briefly across digital screens before disappearing into another ordinary day. Nathan had learned to smile politely during video conferences, while pretending loneliness was simply another business decision. It was easier that way. Easier than admitting the truth. His greatest fear was no longer his mysterious illness. His greatest fear was forgetting what genuine human connection even felt like. The soft mechanical voice of the estate's central intelligence interrupted the peaceful morning. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. Global market activity remains favorable. 12 international meetings begin in 43 minutes. A diplomatic request has also arrived from the United Earth Council." Nathan looked up from the untouched cup of coffee resting beside the panoramic window. "Diplomatic. Confirmed. The request concerns tomorrow's first cultural exchange with the Asturian Alliance." Nathan slowly walked across the enormous living room. Every step echoed through spaces designed for hundreds of guests who had never been invited. Original paintings covered the walls. Sculptures collected from every continent stood beneath carefully positioned lights. None of them made the house feel less empty. "Decline it," he answered quietly. "My condition remains unchanged." The artificial intelligence paused. "The request includes a personal recommendation from the Secretary General." Nathan sighed. "Display it." A holographic message unfolded above the marble table. The Secretary General appeared with the familiar expression of someone balancing optimism against impossible circumstances. "Nathan, I know you rarely accept visitors, but this situation is unique. The first delegation from the Asturian Alliance arrives tomorrow. Among them is Commander Lyra Vey, their leading diplomatic scientist. She specifically requested to meet individuals who represent humanity beyond politics and military leadership. Your contributions to medicine, communication technology, and humanitarian research placed your name at the top of every recommendation. There is absolutely no pressure. I simply hope you will consider it." The message faded into silence. Nathan remained standing without moving. Outside, a gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the quiet garden paths. Somewhere near the far edge of the property, robotic maintenance units trimmed hedges with perfect precision. Everything functioned exactly as intended. Everything except the man who owned it all. He walked toward another wall of glass overlooking the lake. Ducks floated peacefully across the calm water. 2 of them stayed close together, changing direction almost simultaneously without needing words. Nathan watched them longer than he intended. "Funny," he murmured to himself. "Even birds know how not to be alone." The estate's artificial intelligence remained respectfully silent. Nathan rested one hand against the cool glass. Beyond the property fences stretched an entire world filled with conversations, crowded restaurants, neighborhood barbecues, families gathering around dinner tables, children laughing in schoolyards, and strangers accidentally bumping into one another on busy sidewalks. To most people those moments passed unnoticed. To Nathan they felt almost mythical. He had spent years creating technology that brought millions closer together, while watching his own life grow quieter with every passing season. His company slogan appeared on advertisements across the globe, connecting humanity. Nathan often wondered whether the irony would have been funny if it had belonged to someone else. Another notification illuminated the room. Updated diplomatic information. The artificial intelligence announced. Commander Lyra Vey has arrived within Earth's orbit. Nathan barely glanced toward the display. Good for her. A photograph slowly appeared anyway. It showed a blue-skinned woman wearing an elegant silver diplomatic uniform, standing beneath unfamiliar stars with calm intelligence reflected in her luminous eyes. There was nothing dramatic about the image. No ceremony. No grand speech. Just quiet confidence. Nathan looked away almost immediately. He had trained himself not to become curious about people anymore. Curiosity inevitably led to disappointment. Yet for reasons he could not explain. His eyes drifted back toward the holographic portrait one final time before it disappeared. Somewhere beyond the morning sky, a visitor from another world was preparing to meet humanity for the first time. Neither of them knew that before another sunrise arrived, two lonely lives separated by light years would quietly begin changing each other forever. Nathan Brooks had declined the diplomatic invitation 3 separate times before sunrise, and by breakfast every refusal had quietly disappeared from his calendar as though someone somewhere believed persistence could accomplish what medicine never had. He stood alone inside the estate's expansive greenhouse, where rows of citrus trees and flowering orchids thrived beneath a ceiling of transparent glass. Warm morning light filtered through thousands of leaves, painting shifting patterns across the stone walkway. This was the only place inside the mansion that felt alive. The scent of fresh soil, blooming jasmine, and damp earth filled the air, replacing the sterile atmosphere that dominated the rest of the estate. Nathan preferred plants because they expected nothing from him. They never asked why he lived alone. They never wondered why the richest man on earth had never attended a company celebration or accepted an award in person. They simply grew toward the light. Mr. Brooks, the estate intelligence announced gently through hidden speakers. The Secretary General has transmitted a personal message marked urgent. Nathan continued watering a row of small lemon trees. Play it. The holographic image appeared beside him almost instantly. The Secretary General looked more tired than the previous evening, though his smile remained warm. Nathan, I apologize for contacting you again. Commander Lyra Vey has insisted that no special accommodations be made for her visit. She has reviewed your medical history and requested only a brief conversation. She believes understanding begins with listening, not examining. I know how many disappointments you have endured, but perhaps this meeting does not need to be another medical experiment. The recording faded. Nathan remained silent for several moments while tiny droplets slid from the watering can onto the dark soil below. Listening, he murmured. That would be a first. He looked toward the greenhouse windows where distant mountain peaks disappeared beneath drifting morning clouds. Every specialist he had ever met wanted blood samples, neurological scans, immune profiles, or another endless list of laboratory tests. Nobody had ever asked him what loneliness felt like. Schedule the meeting, Nathan finally said. The estate intelligence paused briefly, almost surprised. Confirmed. Commander Lyra Vey will arrive at 1 o'clock this afternoon. The greenhouse suddenly felt much quieter. Nathan returned the watering can to its place and slowly walked back toward the main residence. Autonomous service units silently polished marble floors, while maintenance drones drifted beneath the vaulted ceilings. Everything remained perfectly organized, perfectly efficient, and perfectly empty. Upstairs, Nathan entered a dressing room larger than most apartments. Dozens of tailored suits lined illuminated wardrobes. He selected a simple charcoal jacket instead of the formal attire usually expected during diplomatic events. Looking impressive had never been difficult. Looking comfortable was another matter entirely. A few minutes before 1 o'clock, he stood inside the estate's reception hall. Thick transparent partitions separated the entrance from the main living area, allowing visitors to communicate safely without physical proximity. Nathan had designed the system years earlier after several uncomfortable public incidents forced him to withdraw almost completely from society. Today, however, something unusual happened. The estate intelligence spoke again. Commander Lyra Vey has requested that the protective barrier remain inactive, unless you specifically request otherwise. Nathan frowned. She knows about my condition. Confirmed. Then why would she ask that? No explanation was provided. Nathan stared at the inactive glass partition. Every instinct urged him to activate it before the visitor entered. His hand hovered above the control panel. Then he remembered the Secretary General's words. Understanding begins with listening. Slowly he lowered his hand. The enormous entrance doors opened with a quiet mechanical whisper. Sunlight spilled across the polished floor before a small diplomatic delegation entered the mansion. 2 Earth officials walked first, followed by several members of the alien delegation. Then Nathan saw her. Commander Lyra Vey moved with quiet confidence rather than theatrical importance. Her elegant silver and deep blue uniform reflected soft afternoon light as naturally as flowing water. Her blue skin carried subtle shades that shifted with the changing sunlight, while her silver-white hair rested neatly over one shoulder. She looked around the vast reception hall with calm curiosity instead of awe. There was no judgment in her expression, no sympathy either, only genuine interest. When the others stopped several yards away, Lyra took one additional step forward. Nathan instinctively braced himself. Normally, even that small reduction in distance would trigger the familiar wave of discomfort, beginning behind his eyes before spreading through his entire body. He waited for it. 1 second passed. Then another. Nothing happened. His breathing remained steady. His heartbeat did not race. The familiar pressure behind his temples never arrived. Nathan blinked in confusion. Lyra noticed the subtle change immediately. "Mr. Brooks," she said through the translator, her voice calm and melodic, "I believe this meeting is already becoming more interesting than either of us expected." Nathan stared at her, momentarily forgetting every carefully rehearsed greeting. For the first time in years, another person stood only a few feet away, and his body remained perfectly still. Nathan remained perfectly still, almost afraid that even breathing too deeply might shatter whatever impossible moment had just unfolded. Commander Lyra Vey stood less than 4 feet away, her calm blue eyes meeting his with quiet curiosity, while the familiar wave of pain he had expected simply never arrived. The reception hall felt unusually bright. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the towering windows, scattering reflections across polished marble, and the tranquil indoor fountain that filled the silence with the gentle sound of flowing water. Nathan slowly lifted one hand toward his chest as though confirming his heartbeat was still real. It was steady, relaxed, normal. He had not felt normal in years. One of the Earth officials exchanged a surprised glance with the estate physician standing discreetly near the entrance. The physician quietly checked the biometric display linked to Nathan's wearable monitor. His eyebrows rose almost immediately. Every indicator remained stable. No elevated pulse. No respiratory distress. No neurological warning signals. He looked at the screen twice before saying anything. "This has never happened before," he whispered. Nathan barely heard him. His attention remained fixed on Lyra. "How close are you standing?" he asked quietly. Lyra glanced briefly toward the polished floor before answering. "Approximately 3 feet and 7 inches. Nathan let out a slow breath. "Usually I cannot manage half that distance." Lyra nodded thoughtfully, not with excitement but with careful observation. "Then perhaps we should not rush to explain something we have only just witnessed." Nathan expected her to begin asking for blood samples or medical scans. Instead, she simply smiled gently. "May we sit and talk?" The simplicity of the question caught him completely off guard. Nobody had ever traveled across another world merely to have a conversation with him. "Of course," he answered after a brief pause. He guided the delegation toward a sunlit sitting room overlooking the lake behind the estate. The furniture had been arranged years earlier for guests who almost never came. Large windows framed the distant mountains while soft classical piano music drifted quietly through hidden speakers. A robot quietly served tea before leaving the room without interrupting the conversation. Lyra looked around with genuine interest rather than admiration. Your home is very peaceful, she said. Nathan gave a small laugh. Peaceful is another word for empty. She turned her attention back toward him. Do you dislike being alone? Nathan looked out across the shimmering water. Several ducks glided quietly across the lake, leaving gentle ripples behind them. I dislike not having a choice. The answer lingered between them. Lyra did not interrupt. She simply waited. Nathan realized something unusual. She seemed comfortable allowing silence to exist without trying to fill it. Eventually he continued speaking. People assume wealth solves loneliness. He smiled faintly. It mostly buys quieter rooms. Lyra lowered her teacup onto the table. Our historians studied many wealthy humans before visiting Earth. Nathan looked amused. And most possessed extraordinary influence. She paused briefly. Very few appeared genuinely content. Nathan laughed softly, this time with genuine warmth. Your historians did their homework. For several minutes they spoke about surprisingly ordinary things. Nathan described the mountains surrounding his property, the greenhouse where he spent every morning, and his habit of walking around the lake whenever work became overwhelming. Lyra listened carefully, occasionally asking simple questions about seasons, birds, or weather patterns on Earth. She seemed fascinated by the changing colors of autumn leaves. Your planet allows forests to transform every year, she observed. That is beautiful. Nathan smiled. Most people stop noticing after they grow up. Why? She asked. Because we get busy. Lyra looked toward the mountains glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Perhaps becoming busy is not always becoming wiser. Nathan found himself smiling again. He had smiled more during the past 20 minutes than he had during the previous month. The realization surprised him almost as much as his missing symptoms. Across the room, the estate physician quietly approached the doorway before speaking carefully. Mr. Brooks, would you mind if I performed another biometric reading? Nathan nodded. Go ahead. The physician scanned him with a handheld device before studying the results in complete disbelief. Your stress markers have decreased by nearly 40%, he said quietly. That should not be possible during a first social interaction. Nathan looked toward Lyra. Apparently today is full of impossible things. Lyra's expression softened. Perhaps impossible simply means unexplained. Nathan leaned back comfortably in his chair. Normally by this point any meeting would have ended long ago. Fatigue would have forced him into isolation. Instead, the afternoon passed almost unnoticed. Sunlight gradually shifted across the room as conversation replaced awkwardness. For the first time in many years, Nathan stopped counting the minutes until he could be alone again. Somewhere deep inside, beyond every medical report and every scientific theory that had failed him, another feeling quietly emerged. It was unfamiliar enough to frighten him just a little. Hope. Nathan could not remember the last time he had willingly extended a conversation beyond necessity. Most meetings in his life had followed the same predictable pattern. Greetings. Business. Careful distance. Quiet departure. Yet as the afternoon sunlight drifted across the lake outside the sitting room, neither he nor Commander Lyra Vey seemed interested in ending the conversation. Time moved differently when he no longer counted every minute until his symptoms appeared. A robot quietly entered the room carrying a tray of fresh pastries and fruit before disappearing just as silently as it had arrived. Nathan looked at the untouched food with a faint smile. The kitchen still prepares enough for a family. Lyra studied the carefully arranged table. Do you usually eat alone? Nathan nodded. Every meal. She looked toward the empty chairs surrounding the long dining table visible through the open doorway. Your home was built for many people. It was. Then why remain here by yourself? Nathan rested his hands around the warm ceramic coffee cup. Because after a while you stop designing your life around hope. The answer lingered quietly between them. Lyra did not rush to comfort him. She simply accepted the honesty of the moment. Nathan found that strangely reassuring. Most people became uncomfortable around silence. She seemed to understand that silence sometimes carried more truth than conversation. May I ask something personal? She said softly. Nathan smiled. You already have. A faint smile touched her lips. Then perhaps one more. He nodded. Go ahead. Lyra looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows where sunlight shimmered across the calm surface of the lake. When was the last time someone visited your home simply because they wished to see you? Nathan did not answer immediately. He searched through years of memories filled with board meetings, physicians, security personnel, financial advisors, and political leaders. Hundreds of visitors had crossed the estate gates. None had come simply to spend time with him. Finally, he gave a quiet laugh that carried more sadness than amusement. I honestly cannot remember. Lyra lowered her eyes for a moment. That is a very lonely answer. Nathan looked at her with gentle curiosity. What about you? She seemed surprised by the question. My position requires constant travel. That was not what I asked. For the first time since arriving, Lyra hesitated. She slowly placed her cup back onto the table before answering. In my civilization, emotional attachment is considered an obstacle to objective decision-making. Nathan listened carefully. You mean friendships? Friendships exist. She searched carefully for the correct human words. Deep emotional dependence is discouraged. Nathan leaned back thoughtfully. So everyone stays professional. Very professional. Does it make people happier? Lyra looked toward the mountains beyond the glass. The afternoon sky had begun changing from bright blue to soft shades of gold. We have never measured happiness as an important societal indicator. Nathan smiled gently. Maybe that is the problem. She looked back at him. You believe happiness should be measured? No, he shook his head. I think it should be noticed. The sentence made Lyra unexpectedly quiet. Outside, a pair of ducks crossed the lake together before disappearing into the tall reeds along the shoreline. The simple scene held both of their attention for several peaceful moments. Nathan finally stood. Would you like to see the greenhouse? Lyra looked pleasantly surprised. You are inviting me? Nathan laughed softly. Apparently I am. They walked slowly through wide marble hallways lined with paintings collected from every corner of Earth. Normally Nathan hurried through these rooms without looking. Today he found himself pointing out favorite landscapes and telling stories behind several pieces of artwork. Lyra listened with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. When they entered the greenhouse, warm humid air greeted them immediately. Sunlight filtered through thousands of green leaves while tiny streams of water flowed quietly between flower beds. Butterflies drifted lazily from blossom to blossom beneath the glass ceiling. Lyra stopped walking altogether. This place feels different, she whispered. Nathan smiled. It is the only room that never reminds me I am alone. She slowly walked among the flowering plants, gently brushing one fingertip across the leaf of a lemon tree. Everything here grows because someone cared for it every day. Nathan nodded. Some things cannot be rushed. Lyra turned toward him. Relationships are similar on my world. Nathan raised one eyebrow. I thought emotional attachment was discouraged. It is. She smiled very slightly. That does not prevent gardens from teaching the same lesson. Nathan laughed quietly. The sound echoed gently beneath the glass roof before fading into the peaceful afternoon. For the first time in years, the greenhouse no longer felt like a refuge from the world. It felt like a place where the world had finally found its way back to him, carried not by medicine, wealth, or scientific certainty, but by one unexpected conversation with someone who had arrived from the stars and somehow made an enormous mansion feel a little more like home. Nathan did not realize how long they had remained inside the greenhouse until the afternoon light softened into the rich amber glow that always arrived just before sunset in the mountains. Thin rays filtered through the glass ceiling, illuminating drifting particles of moisture above the flower beds until the entire room shimmered like a quiet dream. The automated irrigation system released a gentle mist across rows of orchids, filling the air with the clean scent of fresh leaves and blooming citrus blossoms. It had become Nathan's favorite hour of the day years ago, because it reminded him that even the most ordinary moments could be beautiful when nobody expected anything from him. Today, for the first time, he was sharing that hour with someone else. Commander Lyra Vey stood beside a flowering magnolia tree, carefully observing the delicate white blossoms. These flowers bloom for only a short time, Nathan said. Every spring I tell myself I should pay more attention before they disappear. Lyra reached toward one blossom without touching it. Impermanence often makes beauty easier to appreciate. Nathan smiled. That sounds like something people spend years trying to learn. She looked at him thoughtfully. Perhaps every civilization learns it differently. A soft notification echoed through the greenhouse. The estate intelligence spoke with its usual calm voice. Mr. Brooks, the diplomatic delegation is preparing for departure in 30 minutes. Nathan felt something unexpectedly heavy settle inside his chest. 30 minutes suddenly seemed much shorter than it should have. He looked away toward the distant lake beyond the greenhouse windows. Time moves faster when you finally enjoy it, he murmured. Lyra heard him clearly. We have a similar saying. Nathan turned back toward her. Really? Our translation would be imperfect. She smiled gently. It means that meaningful conversations borrow time from tomorrow. Nathan laughed quietly. I like that. They continued walking through the greenhouse at an unhurried pace. Nathan found himself pointing out plants he had collected during business trips many years earlier. A Japanese maple grown from a tiny sapling. Lavender transplanted from southern France. Olive trees that had somehow adapted to Colorado's carefully controlled climate. Every plant carried a story, yet until today he had never had anyone willing to hear those stories. Lyra listened patiently, occasionally asking simple questions that revealed genuine curiosity instead of polite obligation. You remember where each one came from, she observed. Nathan nodded. Places become easier to remember when they are connected to people. He stopped speaking almost immediately after saying it. The sentence surprised even him. Lyra noticed. Someone gave these to you? Nathan smiled faintly. Most of them did. His eyes rested on a small cherry tree growing near the center of the greenhouse. That one came from my mother. The warmth in his voice faded into something quieter. She loved gardening. Lyra remained silent. She seemed to understand that interruption would diminish the memory rather than honor it. Nathan slowly approached the little tree. She always believed people could heal if they had something living to care for. He gently brushed one fingertip across a green leaf. After she passed away, I kept planting trees because it felt like continuing a conversation we never quite finished. Lyra stood beside him without speaking for several seconds. Finally she asked softly, "Do you still speak with her?" Nathan looked surprised by the question. She has been gone for years. That was not my question. He looked down at the small tree and smiled with quiet sadness. Sometimes. His voice barely rose above the sound of flowing water. Usually when I think she would have laughed at something. Lyra's expression softened. Then perhaps love survives in more forms than memory alone. Nathan felt another unexpected silence settle comfortably between them. It no longer felt awkward. It felt peaceful. The estate physician entered the greenhouse carrying a digital tablet. Forgive the interruption, he said carefully. I wanted to share today's medical readings before Commander Lyra departs. Nathan accepted the tablet. Every chart displayed the same impossible result. Stable heart rhythm. Normal stress response. Balanced immune activity. The physician shook his head with quiet amazement. These numbers resemble the healthiest day we have ever recorded. Nathan looked from the tablet to Lyra. You still have not examined me once. Lyra smiled. You invited me here to talk, not to become another physician. Yet somehow this is the best medical report I have ever received. She folded her hands calmly. Perhaps healing sometimes begins before treatment. Nathan stared at the screen one last time before setting it aside. For years he had believed his body was a prison from which there could be no escape. Now, standing beside someone who had asked more questions about his life than his illness, he wondered whether another possibility had quietly existed all along. The greenhouse lights gradually brightened as evening settled over the mountains. Beyond the glass, the first stars appeared one by one above the darkening sky. Nathan realized he no longer dreaded tomorrow quite as much as he had yesterday. And although he could not explain why, the thought of saying goodbye suddenly seemed far more frightening than the mysterious condition that had defined his entire adult life. Nathan barely slept that night. Long after the diplomatic delegation had returned to their temporary residence near Denver, he remained awake inside the greenhouse, sitting beside the little cherry tree his mother had given him years before. The estate around him was as quiet as ever, yet the silence no longer felt empty. It felt unfinished, as though the conversations from the afternoon still lingered among the leaves and flowers waiting for sunrise to continue. Every few minutes he glanced at the medical report resting on the bench beside him. The numbers had not changed. His condition had remained stable throughout the entire visit. For years every specialist had searched for a miracle inside laboratories, expensive equipment and experimental treatments. None of them had expected the greatest change to arrive during a quiet afternoon filled with ordinary conversation. As dawn slowly painted the eastern sky with pale shades of gold, Nathan stood and walked toward the lake. Thin layers of mist drifted above the calm water while distant mountains glowed beneath the first sunlight. He had followed this path thousands of times, always alone. Today every familiar view reminded him of someone who had noticed beauty in places he himself had stopped seeing. The changing leaves, the scent of flowers, the sound of birds greeting the morning. Somehow Commander Lyra Vey had looked at his carefully controlled world and found life where he had only seen routine. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," the estate intelligence said softly through hidden speakers along the garden path. "Commander Lyra Vey has requested permission to visit once more before her delegation departs Earth." Nathan stopped walking. "She is still here? Her transport leaves this afternoon." He answered almost immediately. Approved the request. Less than an hour later, the familiar diplomatic vehicle entered the estate through the long tree-lined driveway. This time Nathan did not wait inside the reception hall. Instead, he stood on the stone terrace overlooking the gardens, hands resting comfortably in his pockets as morning sunlight warmed the cool mountain air. When Lyra stepped from the vehicle, she noticed his location immediately. "You came outside," she observed with a gentle smile. Nathan looked around the quiet landscape. "I realized it would be a shame to spend another beautiful morning behind walls." They began walking together through the gardens without any planned destination. No officials followed them. No physicians interrupted. Even the security staff remained respectfully distant. The estate had never seemed so peaceful. They passed rows of lavender swaying gently in the breeze before arriving at a wooden bench overlooking the lake. Nathan sat first. Lyra joined him a comfortable distance away. Neither spoke for several minutes. They simply watched sunlight ripple across the water while a pair of ducks drifted silently near the shoreline. Finally Nathan broke the silence. "Yesterday you asked me when someone last visited because they wanted to see me." Lyra nodded. "Yes." He looked toward the distant mountains. "I have been thinking about that question all night." "And?" Nathan smiled quietly. "I think today counts." Lyra's expression softened. "Yes," she answered. "I believe it does." Nathan laughed gently. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in years." She looked down at her hands before speaking again. "May I tell you something I have not shared with my delegation?" "Of course." She drew a slow breath. "When I volunteered for this mission, many of my colleagues believed studying humanity would be intellectually interesting, but emotionally insignificant." She paused. "I believed them." Nathan listened carefully. "Yesterday changed that?" "Yesterday reminded me that knowledge and understanding are not the same thing." She turned toward him. "I arrived hoping to learn about your species. I did not expect to learn about myself." Nathan smiled with quiet gratitude. "Funny. What is?" "I spent years believing I needed someone to cure me." He looked toward the calm water. "Now I am beginning to wonder whether what I really needed was someone willing to sit beside me without treating me like a problem." The breeze carried the fragrance of blooming roses across the garden. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes hanging beneath the terrace roof produced soft musical notes that blended naturally with birdsong. Everything felt remarkably ordinary, and perhaps that was what made the moment unforgettable. Lyra slowly reached into a small satchel resting beside her and removed a slender crystal pendant suspended from a simple silver cord. The transparent crystal captured the morning sunlight, scattering tiny rainbows across the wooden bench. "This belongs to my family," she said quietly. Nathan looked at it with surprise. "I cannot accept something so personal. It is not a gift of farewell." She placed it gently between them. "It is a promise that meaningful conversations should not end simply because distance begins." Nathan looked from the crystal to her calm blue eyes. "Then I will make you a promise too." "What promise?" He smiled. And for the first time in many years the smile reached all the way to his eyes. "The next time you visit Earth, I will not greet you inside an empty house." Lyra returned his smile. "Then I look forward to meeting the man who lives beyond these walls." For the first time since his mysterious condition had reshaped his entire life, Nathan realized the greatest barrier surrounding his estate had never been the security gates, the medical precautions, or the miles of private land. It had been the quiet belief that nobody would ever choose to walk through those gates, simply because they wished to know the person waiting on the other side. Nathan expected life to return to its familiar routine after Commander Lyra Vay's transport disappeared beyond the morning clouds. Instead, every familiar place inside the estate felt quietly different. The greenhouse no longer seemed like a refuge from loneliness. The empty dining room no longer looked merely expensive. Even the long hallways lined with paintings carried echoes of conversations that had filled them only a day earlier. The silence remained, but it no longer felt permanent. It felt like the pause between two letters waiting to be written. 3 mornings later, Nathan stood in his private medical laboratory reviewing another series of test results. The physicians had repeated every examination using the latest equipment available: blood chemistry, neurological activity, immune response, environmental sensitivity, hormonal balance. Every graph pointed toward the same impossible conclusion: his condition had not disappeared. Yet during every recorded interaction with Lyra, the abnormal reactions had almost completely vanished. Dr. Evelyn Harper, the lead physician who had overseen Nathan's care for nearly a decade, slowly removed her glasses and looked across the conference table. "Nathan," she said carefully, "I think we have been asking the wrong question." He looked up from the report. "What do you mean?" She projected 2 medical timelines onto the wall. One showed years of unstable physiological responses during ordinary human interaction. The other displayed the previous week's remarkable stability. "For years we asked why your body reacted so strongly around people," she explained. "Now I think we should ask something else." Nathan folded his arms. "Go on." She pointed toward the newest data. "What changed first?" Nathan studied the graphs. "The medical readings." She gently shook her head. "No," she enlarged another chart showing subtle neurological activity. "Your emotional stress indicators dropped almost 30 minutes before your immune responses stabilized." Nathan stared at the display. "That cannot be right." "The instruments disagree." The room became very quiet. Dr. Harper continued in a calm voice. "Every previous consultation focused on controlling your physical symptoms. Commander Lyra did something none of us attempted." Nathan already knew the answer before she spoke it. "She treated me like a person." Dr. Harper nodded. "Your nervous system appears to have remained in a prolonged state of defensive alertness for years. We may have mistaken the consequence for the cause." Nathan slowly sat down, looking through the laboratory window toward the distant mountains. "You are saying I was never allergic to humanity itself. I am saying your body may have forgotten what safety felt like." The words settled inside him more deeply than any diagnosis he had ever received. He thought about countless hospital rooms filled with bright lights and worried faces, endless procedures, endless questions, endless reminders that something inside him was broken. Nobody had asked him when he had last laughed. Nobody had asked whether he felt lonely. Nobody had asked what made him feel safe. Later that afternoon, Nathan walked alone through the greenhouse carrying a small watering can. He paused beside the cherry tree his mother had planted with him years ago. The crystal pendant Lyra had left rested around his neck beneath his open collar. Sunlight caught the transparent crystal whenever he moved, scattering tiny reflections across the leaves. The estate intelligence interrupted the peaceful silence. "Incoming communication from Commander Lyra Vay." Nathan's heart lifted so suddenly that he laughed at himself. "Put it through." A holographic image appeared among the flowering trees. Lyra stood inside what looked like a quiet observation deck aboard her diplomatic vessel. Through the panoramic window behind her, stars stretched endlessly across the darkness. "Good afternoon, Nathan," she said with the same calm smile he remembered. "Good afternoon," he answered. "How is space?" She looked over one shoulder at the stars. "Remarkably consistent." Nathan smiled. "Earth has been less consistent." She noticed the warmth in his expression immediately. Something has changed. Nathan told her everything. The new medical findings. Dr. Harper's conclusion. The realization that fear itself might have shaped years of suffering. Lyra listened without interrupting, exactly as she always had. When he finished, she remained thoughtful for several moments. On my world, she said softly, we teach children that the mind and body are partners, not strangers. If one carries a burden long enough, the other eventually begins carrying it too. Nathan nodded slowly. I wish someone had told me that years ago. Perhaps you would not have believed them. He smiled. You are probably right. Another comfortable silence settled between them despite the unimaginable distance separating Earth from her vessel. Nathan realized something extraordinary. The feeling of calm he had experienced beside her had returned simply by hearing her voice. Lyra, he said quietly, I think you helped me long before anyone understood why. She smiled with gentle sincerity. Nathan, I do not think I healed you. He looked at her with curiosity. No. She slowly shook her head. I think you finally found permission to stop believing you had to face the universe alone. Nathan looked through the greenhouse roof where the late afternoon sky stretched endlessly overhead. 4 years he had measured his life by what his illness had taken away. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether healing might begin not by recovering everything that had been lost, but by accepting the quiet possibility that tomorrow did not have to look exactly like yesterday. Nathan's world began changing in ways that no medical chart could explain. The estate that had once functioned like an isolated fortress slowly became a place filled with small signs of life again. Every morning he opened the greenhouse doors instead of leaving them sealed. Every afternoon he walked beyond the private gardens and followed the trails winding through the surrounding hills. Dr. Evelyn Harper encouraged the changes, not because they appeared in any treatment protocol, but because every step Nathan took beyond his carefully controlled routines seemed to strengthen the quiet recovery already unfolding inside him. Weeks passed. His condition did not disappear overnight, but something remarkable happened. Short conversations with members of his staff no longer left him completely exhausted. Brief visits with Dr. Harper became possible without the overwhelming distress that had once defined every appointment. The improvement remained gradual, delicate, almost fragile, yet undeniably real. Nathan no longer measured progress by what his body could not do. He measured it by what he had quietly begun doing again. Every evening, almost without fail, he and Commander Lyra Vey spoke through a secure interstellar communication channel. Sometimes they discussed scientific discoveries from her travels. Other nights they simply watched the same stars from different worlds, sharing long stretches of comfortable silence while each described the sky outside their own window. Nathan eventually admitted that those conversations had become the favorite part of every day. Lyra confessed that she had started planning her research schedule around Earth's evenings, so their conversations would never be interrupted. One autumn afternoon, Nathan received another unexpected message from the United Earth Council. This time it was not a request for a private meeting. It was an invitation to attend the first joint human and Asturian cultural forum in person. The event would gather scientists, educators, artists, and diplomats from both civilizations. Nathan read the invitation twice before quietly placing it on his desk. Only a few months earlier he would have declined without hesitation. Now the answer felt much more complicated. That evening he mentioned it during his call with Lyra. Her holographic image appeared beside the greenhouse window, while gentle rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling overhead. You are considering going, she observed. Nathan smiled faintly. You already know me too well. You would not have mentioned the invitation otherwise. He looked toward the rain-soaked garden outside. Part of me still worries everything will return the moment I step into a crowded room. Lyra nodded with understanding. Fear often remembers old pain even after healing has begun. Nathan laughed quietly. Dr. Harper says something similar. She appears to be wise. Nathan remained silent for several moments before asking the question that had quietly followed him for days. Will you be there? Lyra smiled. I have already accepted the assignment. The answer settled warmly inside him. Then maybe I should stop inventing reasons to stay home. 2 weeks later, Nathan stood backstage inside the newly completed International Unity Center overlooking Denver. Sunlight streamed through enormous glass walls while visitors from Earth and the Astarian Alliance filled the spacious atrium beyond. Laughter echoed gently through the building. Human children pointed excitedly toward alien technology displays while Astarian visitors admired paintings created by local schools. Everything felt surprisingly ordinary, and perhaps that made it extraordinary. Dr. Harper adjusted Nathan's jacket collar one final time. "Your heart rate is elevated," she said with a reassuring smile. Nathan chuckled. "That happens before every speech. This is not because of the speech." He followed her gaze toward the entrance. Commander Lyra Vey had just arrived with the diplomatic delegation. The elegant silver and deep blue uniform she wore caught the afternoon light as naturally as flowing water. She noticed Nathan almost immediately. Neither of them moved for a moment. There were hundreds of people surrounding them, conversations filling every corner of the enormous hall, cameras recording history from every angle. Yet somehow the noise faded into the background. Nathan slowly walked toward her. One step, then another. He waited for the familiar wave of fear to return. It never did. When they finally stood face to face, Lyra smiled with quiet pride. "You came." Nathan looked around the lively hall before returning his eyes to hers. "I almost did not. What changed your mind?" He thought about the empty mansion, the greenhouse, the cherry tree planted by his mother, the impossible medical reports, and the countless conversations shared across unimaginable distances. Then he smiled. "Someone reminded me that healing is not measured by how well we hide from life." Lyra's luminous eyes reflected the afternoon sunlight. "And what do you believe now?" Nathan looked toward the people from two worlds speaking, laughing, and learning together beneath the same roof. "I believe some doors are meant to stay open, once you finally find the courage to walk through them." For the first time since illness had quietly separated him from the rest of humanity, Nathan stood among a crowd without feeling like an outsider. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that hope no longer felt like a distant possibility. It felt like the life he had already begun living. Nearly 1 year later, the estate hidden among the Colorado mountains no longer resembled the silent fortress Nathan Brooks had once called home. The security gates still stood at the entrance, but they opened almost every day for visitors from Earth and the Astarian Alliance. The greenhouse had expanded into a botanical research center where human scientists and alien biologists worked side by side, exchanging ideas beneath the same glass roof that had once sheltered only one lonely man and his memories. The dining room that had remained empty for years now echoed with conversations, shared meals, and quiet laughter. Nathan often paused in the hallway outside before entering, simply to appreciate a sound he had once believed he would never hear again. His health had continued improving in ways that surprised even Dr. Evelyn Harper. She never claimed to have discovered a miracle treatment. Instead, every report she published emphasized something much simpler. Healing could not always be separated into body and mind. Sometimes a person's greatest medicine was the return of trust, purpose, and genuine connection. Nathan still experienced difficult days from time to time. Recovery had not erased every challenge. Yet those difficult days no longer defined his entire life. They had become chapters instead of the whole story. On a warm spring morning, Nathan stood beside the cherry tree his mother had planted years before. The branches were covered with soft pink blossoms dancing gently in the breeze. Around him, children from both civilizations wandered through the gardens during an educational exchange program. Human students eagerly asked questions about distant planets while young Astarians laughed with genuine curiosity after discovering butterflies landing on their sleeves. Watching them together, Nathan realized something extraordinary. None of them cared where friendship was supposed to begin. They simply allowed it to happen. Footsteps approached quietly across the stone pathway. Nathan turned before he heard a voice. Commander Lyra Vey had returned to Earth exactly as she had promised. Her familiar silver and deep blue uniform caught the morning sunlight, while the crystal pendant he still wore beneath his shirt reflected the same gentle colors back toward her. She smiled before speaking. "Your garden has become much larger." Nathan looked around at the blooming trees and busy walkways. "So has my world." They began walking side by side beneath rows of flowering magnolias. The path wound gently around the lake where ducks still glided peacefully across the calm water. exactly as they had during their first conversation months earlier. Some things, Nathan realized, did not need to change in order for life to become completely different. Lyra stopped beside the wooden bench where they had once spoken about loneliness, hope, and open doors. "Do you remember what you promised me here?" she asked softly. Nathan smiled. "That the next time you visited, you would not find an empty house." Lyra looked toward the lively estate where researchers, gardeners, children, physicians, artists, and diplomats shared the same morning without barriers between them. "You kept your promise." Nathan laughed quietly. "You helped me keep it." She gently shook her head. "You opened the first door yourself." They sat together without speaking for several minutes. The breeze carried the scent of roses and fresh grass across the gardens, while birds nested among the flowering branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed. Another voice answered. The sounds blended together into something Nathan had once considered impossible: home. Later that afternoon, the International Unity Center unveiled a simple bronze plaque donated anonymously by one of Nathan's charitable foundations. It stood beneath a newly planted cherry tree at the entrance to the gardens. Visitors often paused to read the inscription before continuing their walk. It contained only one sentence: "The strongest bridges are not built from stone or steel. They are built when one heart chooses not to close its door." Few people knew who had written those words. Nathan never claimed credit. He believed the message belonged to everyone who needed it. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, golden light spread across the lake exactly as it had on the afternoon when Commander Lyra Vey first walked through the doors of an enormous mansion filled with silence. Nathan stood beside her watching the reflection shimmer across the water. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had never accepted that invitation?" Lyra asked. Nathan thought for a long moment before answering. "I used to believe the greatest tragedy in life was losing years to illness." He smiled gently as children from two worlds ran laughing through the gardens behind them. "Now I think the greatest tragedy would have been never discovering that healing sometimes arrives disguised as an ordinary conversation." Lyra quietly reached for his hand. There was no hesitation, no fear, no alarm from medical monitors hidden beneath expensive clothing. Only warmth. Nathan looked toward the endless sky where the first evening stars quietly appeared one after another above the peaceful mountains. Somewhere beyond them stretched countless civilizations waiting to meet one another. He smiled because he finally understood something that wealth had never been able to purchase and science alone had never fully explained. The universe became smaller every time someone chose compassion over distance, and larger every time hope invited another soul to walk through an open door.